In just 53 seconds, Jasmine Crockett delivered the most devastating intellectual takedown in congressional history, leaving Donald Trump visibly shaken and scrambling for words as cameras captured every moment of his public humiliation. The president's face went from smug confidence to stunned silence as the freshman congresswoman from Texas dismantled his attack with surgical precision. But what led to this explosive moment that had political commentators calling it the greatest comeback in modern politics? The House Judiciary Committee hearing room buzzed with tension on that crisp October morning. President Trump had requested to testify about ongoing investigations, claiming he wanted to set the record straight. Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler gavelled the session to order as Trump settled into the witness chair, his signature red tie slightly askew from the walk through the Capitol corridors. "Good morning, Mr. President," Chairman Nadler began. "Thank you for appearing before the committee voluntarily." Trump leaned into the microphone, his voice carrying that familiar tone of barely contained irritation. "Well, Jerry, I figured it was time someone with actual intelligence came down here to explain things to you people. This whole witch hunt has gone on long enough." Murmurs rippled through the packed gallery. Jasmine Crockett sat 3 seats down from the chairman, her expression calm but alert. She had been preparing for this moment since learning of Trump's surprise testimony announcement. Her legal background and quick wit had already made her a rising star in Democratic circles, but today would be different. Congressman Jim Jordan jumped in first, lobbing softball questions about border security and economic policies. Trump's responses were predictably bombastic, filled with superlatives and self-congratulation. "Nobody's been tougher on crime than me, Jim. Nobody's been smarter about trade deals. The fake news media won't tell you that, but it's true." As the questioning continued, Trump's confidence grew. He began making pointed remarks about various committee members, questioning their competence and experience. His eyes kept drifting toward Jasmine Crockett, and those watching could sense he was building toward something. Congressman Matt Gaetz took his turn, allowing Trump to elaborate on his achievements. "Mr. President, some of your critics have questioned your decision-making process. How do you respond to that?" Trump's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Matt, look around this room. Half these people couldn't run a hot dog stand, let alone understand the complexities of running the greatest nation on earth. Take someone like, I don't know." His gaze fixed on Jasmine Crockett, the freshman from Texas there. "Probably thinks she's some kind of legal genius because she passed the bar exam." The room fell silent. Jasmine Crockett's posture straightened slightly, but her expression remained composed. She had faced this kind of condescension before, both as a young black woman in law school and during her early career as a public defender. But this was different. This was the President of the United States, on live television, in the halls of Congress. Chairman Nadler cleared his throat. "Mr. President, please direct your answers to the questions being asked." Trump waved him off. No, Jerry, this is important. The American people deserve to know who's making decisions about their future. Some of these committee members, especially the newer ones, they think they're qualified to judge me. They probably can't even spell constitutional law correctly." Congressman Nadler looked uncomfortable. "Mr. President, I must insist." "You know what?" Trump continued, his voice gaining momentum. "I've been thinking about this for a while. These hearings, all these questions from people who clearly don't understand basic governance, maybe we should have a little test, a real examination of who actually knows what they're talking about." Republican members exchanged glances, some looking pleased with Trump's aggressive approach, others appearing concerned about where this was heading. Democratic members sat in stunned silence, waiting to see how far the president would push this unprecedented breach of congressional decorum. Trump turned fully toward Jasmine Crockett. "Congresswoman Crockett, you've been sitting there looking so serious, taking your little notes. Tell me, what's the difference between a criminal case and a civil case? Basic stuff, right? Should be easy for someone with your, credentials." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Cameras zoomed in on both figures, capturing Trump's smirk and Jasmine's steady gaze. The gallery held its collective breath. Jasmine Crockett set down her pen deliberately and looked directly at the president. Her voice was clear and measured. "Mr. President, I appreciate your interest in my legal knowledge. In a criminal case, the government prosecutes an individual for violating laws that protect society as a whole. The burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt, and the defendant has constitutional protections, including the right to remain silent." Trump's smirk widened. "Very good, very textbook. What about civil cases? In civil litigation, private parties seek monetary damages or equitable relief for perceived wrongs. The burden of proof is preponderance of the evidence, which is a lower standard. The defendant doesn't have the same Fifth Amendment protections. Impressive, Trump said, his tone suggesting anything but genuine appreciation. Now, since you seem to know the basics, let's try something a little more challenging. Constitutional law, separation of powers. Explain to everyone here why the executive branch can't just ignore congressional subpoenas when they're clearly politically motivated witch hunts. The question was loaded, designed to trap her into either supporting his position or making a statement that could be twisted later. But Jasmine Crockett had spent years in courtrooms facing hostile prosecutors and skeptical judges. She recognized the trap immediately. "Mr. President," she began, her voice gaining strength, "the Constitution establishes 3 co-equal branches of government. Congress has explicit oversight authority under Article 1. When the legislative branch issues lawful subpoenas as part of legitimate investigations, executive privilege has limits that have been established by decades of Supreme Court precedent, including cases like United States versus Nixon." Trump's expression began to shift. The easy target he thought he'd found was proving more formidable than expected. "But what about executive privilege?" he pressed. "Surely you understand that a president needs to protect confidential communications?" "Executive privilege is not absolute, Mr. President. As the Supreme Court ruled in Nixon, it cannot overcome judicial subpoenas for criminal proceedings. Similarly, congressional oversight powers are broad, especially when investigating potential misconduct or ensuring proper execution of laws." Trump's jaw tightened as he realized his constitutional law quiz wasn't going according to plan. The cameras captured the subtle shift in his demeanor, the way his confident posture began to stiffen. But he wasn't backing down, not yet. "Well, that's all very theoretical, Congresswoman," Trump said, leaning forward with renewed aggression. "But theory and practice are 2 different things. Let me ask you something that requires real intelligence, not just memorized law school answers. If you're so smart, explain to everyone here why someone with my IQ, my business success, my incredible electoral victory, should have to sit here and answer questions from someone who's been in Congress for what, 5 minutes? The room erupted in murmurs. Even seasoned political reporters looked shocked at the brazenness of the attack. Chairman Nadler banged his gavel repeatedly. "Mr. President, this is highly inappropriate." But Trump continued, his voice rising. "No, Jerry, let's settle this once and for all. I went to Wharton, one of the best business schools in the world. I built a multi-billion-dollar empire. I defeated Hillary Clinton when everyone said it was impossible. I think the American people deserve to know whether the person questioning their president has the intellectual capacity to even understand the issues at stake here." Jasmine Crockett remained perfectly still during Trump's tirade, her hands folded calmly on the table. When silence finally fell over the room, she spoke in a voice so quiet that everyone strained to listen. "Mr. President, you asked about my intellectual capacity. You mentioned your business success and your electoral victory. You questioned whether I understand the issues at stake." She paused, her eyes never leaving his face. "Would you like me to demonstrate my understanding?" Trump, perhaps sensing he'd pushed too far but unable to back down, nodded curtly. "Please, enlighten us all." What happened next would be replayed on news channels for weeks. Jasmine Crockett's voice remained steady, but her words cut through the air like a blade. "Mr. President, you filed for bankruptcy 6 times. Your casinos failed despite being in an industry where, as you've said, the house always wins. Your airline lasted 4 years. Your mortgage company collapsed right before the housing crisis. Your university was shut down for fraud, resulting in a $25 million settlement. Your charity was dissolved by court order for misusing funds intended for veterans and children." Trump's face began to redden, but Jasmine continued without pause. "You claimed your net worth was $10 billion, but Deutsche Bank documents suggest it was closer to $700 million, and much of that in illiquid assets. You've been involved in over 4,000 lawsuits. You've made over 30,000 false or misleading claims during your presidency, according to fact-checkers. You suggested injecting bleach to cure COVID. You stared directly at a solar eclipse." The gallery was dead silent. Trump opened his mouth to interrupt, but Jasmine raised her voice just enough to continue. "You asked about my 5 minutes in Congress versus your experience. In those 5 minutes, I've passed 3 pieces of legislation through committee. In your 4 years as president, you passed one major legislative achievement, a tax cut that primarily benefited the wealthy and added over $2 trillion to the national debt. You promised to eliminate the debt entirely. Trump's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. The color had drained from his face. You mentioned your electoral victory. You lost the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes. You received fewer votes than Hillary Clinton. Your margin in the Electoral College was 46th out of 58 presidential elections. You called it a landslide, but it was actually smaller than Obama's victory, which you called close. Camera operators zoomed in on Trump's expression, capturing the exact moment his trademark confidence completely evaporated. You attended Wharton for 2 years as an undergraduate transfer student. I graduated summa cum laude from Bowie State University, earned my law degree, passed the bar on my first attempt, worked as a public defender representing people who couldn't afford attorneys, then got elected to the Texas House before coming to Congress. My GPA was 3.97. What was yours? The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Trump stared at her, his mouth slightly agape, completely unprepared for the systematic dismantling of every point he tried to make. For the first time in recent memory, Donald Trump appeared to have no response. Trump started, then stopped. Those numbers are fake news, everyone knows. But his voice lacked its usual conviction. The fight had gone out of him completely. Jasmine Crockett's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. Mr. President, you questioned my intelligence and qualifications. I've answered with facts. Now, would you like to return to the legitimate oversight questions this committee was formed to ask? Or would you prefer to continue this intellectual comparison? Chairman Nadler, who had been frantically shuffling papers during the exchange, finally found his voice. I think we should move on to the prepared questions. Trump slumped back in his chair, his usual bluster completely deflated. For the remaining 2 hours of testimony, he gave short, subdued answers. None of the bombast or self-aggrandizement that typically characterized his public appearances. As the hearing concluded and Trump left the Capitol, reporters shouted questions about Jasmine Crockett's response. He walked past them without comment, his usual crowd of supporters noticeably quieter than usual. Within hours, clips of the exchange had millions of views across social media. Political commentators called it the most effective takedown of Trump they'd ever witnessed. Late-night hosts devoted entire segments to replaying the 53 seconds that had reduced the most powerful man in the world to stunned silence. But perhaps the most telling moment came later that evening, when a reporter asked Jasmine Crockett about her performance. Her response was characteristically measured. I simply answered his questions with facts. In my experience, facts tend to speak for themselves. The hearing that was supposed to be Trump's opportunity to control the narrative instead became a masterclass in how preparation, knowledge, and grace under pressure could triumph over bluster and intimidation. Jasmine Crockett had proven that intelligence isn't about the volume of your voice or the audacity of your claims. It's about your ability to think clearly, speak truthfully, and stand your ground when challenged. That's the story of how one Congresswoman, armed with nothing but facts and unshakable composure, managed to do what political opponents, prosecutors, and critics had been trying to do for years: leave Donald Trump completely speechless on live television. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe for more incredible political moments and comment below. What do you think was the most devastating part of Jasmine Crockett's response?